Dear Lord, forgive me, for I am about to sin. They say sin knocks before it enters. But this one didn't knock. It walked in, sat beside me, and made itself feel at home. The desire before me is so irresistible, I had to confess before it happens. I'm one breath away from doing something I may never be able to pray my way out of, but I'll do it without remorse. Please guide me when the consequences arise. If someone had told Amara that her greatest downfall would begin with a simple accident, she would have laughed. But that's the thing about life. It doesn't knock before it enters. It doesn't warn before it turns everything upside down. That afternoon, Amara wasn't planning to fall. She wasn't even thinking of anything sinful. She had just finished a meeting at Shining Heart's Haven and was busy typing updates for the church youth group on her phone. She didn't see him coming. It wasn't a small bump. It was the kind that nearly threw her phone to the ground and made her heart skip a beat. She looked up, and the world slowed down. Standing in front of her was a man who didn't look ordinary. Tall, dark-skinned, and broad-chested, like someone who had been through life and come out victorious. His white shirt fit him like it was made just for him, tucked perfectly into trousers so sharp they looked like they could slice the wind. But it was his eyes that made her lose balance, steady, deep, and unreadable. Her heart jumped. Not the kind of jump fear gives, but the kind only desire can awaken. The kind that makes your chest tighten and your knees feel like water. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice deep and smooth like it had been soaked in honey. Amara swallowed hard. I'm fine. Sorry, sir." She didn't even recognize her voice. It came out small, almost helpless. He smiled, and that smile nearly pushed the last bit of sense out of her head. It wasn't a polite smile. It was soft, knowing, dangerous. The kind of smile that carried promises no Christian woman should ever open. But before she could collect herself, she heard a voice, familiar, joyful, and unmistakable. "Amara? Amara, is that you?" She turned, and her heart nearly flew out of her chest. It was Zainab, her Zainab, the childhood friend who used to share her meals, her clothes, her secrets. The same girl who left their village at the age of 11, when her father got transferred to Lafia City. They had promised to write, to stay in touch. But life got busy. They lost each other. And now here she was, fully grown, glowing like the sun itself. Her skin was smooth, her smile radiant, and her arm wrapped tightly around the man Amara had just bumped into. "It's me," Amara cried out, laughing as they hugged tightly, spinning in excitement like children reunited after many years. Time disappeared. It was like they were young again, running under the mango tree, jumping puddles in the rain, whispering silly dreams into each other's ears. "Meet my husband," Zainab said proudly. "This is Dio." Husband. That word slammed into Amara's chest like a door suddenly shut in her face. She smiled, or at least tried to. She reached out to shake his hand again, pretending her palms weren't sweating. Dio's grip was firm, too firm, and it lingered just a second longer than it should have. Their eyes met again, and in that moment, something passed between them. Something wrong, something quiet, but heavy. Something neither of them had the right to feel. From that day, her life began to change. Zainab pulled her in like old times, calling her every day, inviting her over, sharing food, laughter, and long-forgotten memories. At first, it was all so pure, so simple, until it wasn't. Because every time Amara visited, Dio was there. Calm, polite, respectful, but too observant, too intense. He didn't say much, but his presence said enough. And Amara, try as she might, but couldn't stop noticing him either. The way his shirt hugged his arms, the way he laughed when Zainab teased him, the way his eyes sometimes found hers and stayed there a second too long. She hated herself for noticing. She prayed, she fasted, she cried, She went to her pastor, Pastor Bayo, and confessed her heart was getting weak. The pastor looked her in the eyes and said one thing: run. Run before your name becomes a warning in someone's sermon. She nodded. She meant to obey. She really did. But feelings don't die because you command them to. They only hide and wait. One quiet evening, Zainab and Amara were sitting on the veranda, peeling oranges and chatting about old classmates, when Zainab's voice dropped. "Do you know why we returned to Olowo?" she asked softly. Amara shook her head. Zainab took a breath. "It's been 6 years since we got married. We've done everything, test after test, doctor after doctor. But no child, nothing. And the worst part is, there's no medical explanation." Amara's hands paused. Zainab continued, her voice trembling. "I kept myself for marriage. I did everything right. I fasted, I prayed, but still, nothing. Sometimes I wonder if God is ignoring me." Amara looked at her friend. So beautiful, so full of love and hope. And suddenly the weight of what she was feeling pressed hard against her chest. She wanted to tell Zainab everything, to scream and confess and run far away. But instead she said, "Don't give up. God sees you." Zainab smiled sadly. "I know. And Dio has been patient. He says even if we don't have children, he'll still love me. But deep down, I know he wants to be a father." Amara nodded slowly. Her throat felt tight. Her stomach turned, because the same man Zainab was praising was the man she had started to desire in silence. That night, Amara returned home, knelt down beside her bed, placed her hands on her Bible, and begged God to help her. "Please take this feeling away," she whispered. "Please don't let me be the reason another woman cries." But God didn't speak, and just as she was about to sleep, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Dio. "I can't stop thinking about you, Amara. What have you done to me?" She stared at the screen. Her hands began to shake. She held her Bible with one hand and her phone with the other. And in that moment, Amara stood between two worlds, one of light and one of fire. From the moment Amara received that message, peace became a stranger to her. Every morning she told herself she would stay away. Every night she found herself thinking about him. She didn't reply. She didn't block the number either. She simply stared at it, again and again, reading those same words. "I can't stop thinking about you. What have you done to me?" She prayed. She wept. But desire had already planted its roots. And once that kind of seed enters the heart, it grows, whether you water it or not. Amara stayed away from Zainab's house for a while. She kept herself busy with church meetings, youth planning, midweek Bible study, anything to keep her distracted. But deep down, she knew she wasn't running from work. She was running from Dio, because every time she looked into his eyes, her knees betrayed her. And every time she remembered that message, her heart raced like it was being chased by something it couldn't outrun. Zainab noticed the silence. She called, texted, left voice notes. "Amara, have I offended you?" she asked one day. Amara quickly replied, "No, I've just been busy with church work." And Zainab, sweet and trusting, believed her. One Saturday, Amara couldn't avoid it anymore. Zainab insisted she come over. "Just for lunch," she said. "No excuses this time." Amara dressed simply, tying her scarf extra tight, as if trying to strangle her feelings into submission. She arrived at their house and was welcomed with warm hugs, fresh jollof rice, fried plantain, and sweet-smelling zobo. For a moment, she allowed herself to relax, to laugh again, to feel normal. Until Dio entered the room. He greeted her with a calm smile, but his eyes, those eyes, told a different story. He sat across from her at the table. Their eyes didn't meet, but the tension hung in the air like thick smoke. Amara avoided looking at him, but she could feel him watching her, and worse, part of her wanted him too. Later that day, Zainab went into the kitchen to check the food, warming on the gas stove. Amara stayed back in the living room, rearranging the throw pillows just to keep herself busy. That was when Dio entered. He didn't say anything at first. He simply stood there, close enough to be noticed, far enough not to be questioned. Then, in a low voice, he spoke. "Do you feel it too? Or am I the only one going mad?" Amara froze. Her fingers clutched the edge of the pillow like it could save her. "Don't say that," she whispered without looking at him. "But it's the truth," Dio replied, stepping a little closer. "You avoid my eyes, but your body tells a different story." She turned sharply. "You're married. To my best friend. Please don't do this." "I've tried," he said quietly, "but I can't stop thinking about you." Amara stood up immediately and walked outside. She breathed in the air like someone escaping a fire. Her heart pounded so loud she could barely hear her thoughts. Zainab joined her a few minutes later, smiling as if nothing had happened. But Amara's world was spinning, and from that moment on, everything changed. That night, Amara tossed and turned in her bed. She clutched her pillow tightly, trying to silence her mind. But her thoughts had a voice of their own, and they kept replaying his words. "Do you feel it too?" She got up and knelt to pray, but her mouth was dry. No words came, only tears. The next morning, she decided to go and see Pastor Bayo again. She didn't tell him the full story, but she said enough. That a married man was troubling her spirit, that her heart was growing weak. The pastor looked at her for a long moment, then said gently, "When a lion starts smiling at you, don't wait to see its teeth. Run. You're still in control. Don't give the devil a seat at your table." Amara nodded slowly. She promised herself that day she would stay far away. But temptation doesn't knock on the door anymore. It enters through the window, right? A few days later, Amara went to buy onions at the market. As she walked toward the junction, a black car pulled up slowly beside her. It was Dio. He wound down the window and smiled. "Let me drop you," he said softly. She shook her head, kept walking, but he followed slowly. "5 minutes, Amara. Just 5 minutes of your time. Please." Against her better judgment, she stopped. Her hands trembled as she opened the car door and sat beside him. Inside the car, the silence was louder than any sermon. He didn't drive. He didn't touch her. He just looked ahead and said, "I know this is wrong. I've told myself that 100 times. But still, here I am." Amara said nothing. She wanted to speak, to scream, to get out of the car, but she couldn't move. He turned to her slowly. "Tell me you don't feel the same," he said. She opened her mouth, but the lie didn't come out. And in that silence, they both understood everything. No kiss, no touch, but the line had already been crossed. From that moment on, they stopped pretending. Every look carried a message. Every word was layered. Every silence was louder. Zainab remained clueless. She still called Amara my sister, still prayed for her, still believed she was the safest person to trust. And that was the worst part, because guilt doesn't shout, it whispers. And Amara could feel it, whispering louder every day. The line between wrong and right is always clear, until emotions blur it. After that ride with Dio, Amara couldn't see the line anymore. The thoughts she once tried to cast out with prayer now found a home in her heart. She no longer resisted them. She simply sat with them, carried them, fed them with silence. Every day felt like a quiet war. In the morning, Amara would read her Bible, determined to stay clean. By afternoon, her hands would tremble any time her phone buzzed. By night, she would find herself replaying Dio's voice in her mind. It wasn't just temptation anymore. It had become torment. One Thursday evening, Amara attended night prayer at church. She sang, she clapped, she shouted Amen louder than usual. But her spirit felt like dry ground. No matter how much the word rained down, Nothing soaked in. As the service ended, she knelt at the altar long after others had left. Tears ran freely as she whispered, "God, I don't want this. Please help me. Help me before I fall." But even as the words left her lips, another part of her heart, the part already in love with Dio, remained silent. That part didn't want help. That part wanted more. Days later, Amara received a message from Dio. "I miss you. I know you're avoiding me, but my heart is restless." She stared at the message for a long time. Then, for the first time, she replied, "We can't keep doing this." His response came almost immediately. "Just one evening. No pressure. Just talk. Please." She didn't respond again, but her silence said enough. That night she had a dream. She was in a dark forest, running barefoot through wet soil. Her white wrapper was soaked and torn. Behind her, something was chasing her, fast, heavy, unseen. Up ahead, Dio stood beneath a tree, arms open wide. "Come to me," he said. She wanted to run past him, but her legs stopped moving. Then, from behind her, she heard a familiar voice, Zainab's. "Amara, please don't go." She turned to look, but no one was there. She woke up with sweat running down her back and her pillow damp from tears. The next morning, Amara wore her plainest dress and wrapped her scarf tightly as usual. Then she went to visit Mama Iabo, the oldest prayer woman in the village, a woman known to see beyond the surface. Mama Iabo opened her wooden door slowly and stared at Amara without speaking. After a long pause, she stepped aside and said, "You have come late, but not too late." Amara entered quietly and sat on the mat. She didn't need to explain much. The woman listened as Amara poured out her heart, how it started, the thoughts she couldn't shake, the dreams, the message from Dio, and the fear that she was losing herself. Mama Iyabo nodded. Then she walked to a small drawer and pulled out a string with a brass coin tied to the end. "Wear this," she said, "close to your skin." "What is it?" Amara asked. "It will stay cold," the old woman replied, "unless you step into something that cannot be undone. Then it will burn you. That will be your final warning." Amara took the coin and tied it beneath her blouse. She thanked the woman and promised to stay strong. But promises are easier made than kept. Later that night, Amara sat by her window. The village was quiet, dogs barking in the distance, a faint sound of someone pounding yam in the next compound. She opened her Bible but couldn't read. The letters blurred. Her mind was far away. Then, as if on cue, her phone lit up. Another message from Dio. "Tomorrow, 5 p.m., Marua Hills Lodge, just for a short while. I need to see you. No one will know." Amara read the message 3 times. She clutched the coin at her chest. It was cold, still cold. She whispered, "God, say something." But the silence in her room was louder than thunder, and that was when she knew she could go ahead. She had already made her decision. The next evening, she stood at the edge of temptation. She had dressed simply, but carefully. No makeup, just perfume. A tiny bottle she hadn't used in months. Soft, floral, dangerous. She arrived at the hotel before Dio. Room 206. She sat on the edge of the bed, palms sweaty, heart beating like a funeral drum. Then came the knock. She opened the door. And there he was, dressed in a plain shirt and jeans, smiling like the world hadn't already gone wrong. He stepped in slowly, closed the door behind him, and stood in front of her without saying a word. For a few seconds they just stared at each other. Then he reached out, brushed a stray hair from her face, and whispered, "I've wanted this for so long." When he touched her, something inside Amara shattered. Her hand clutched the brass coin. It was no longer cold. It was burning, burning against her skin like it was trying to brand her with guilt. But she didn't stop. She didn't pull away. Because the truth is, Sin doesn't feel like sin in the moment. Sometimes it feels like a breath of fresh air, like warmth, like finally having what your heart has been aching for. What happened next, only the walls witnessed, but the consequences, those would speak louder than anything else in the world, because the body will always remember things the mind wants to forget, right? After that night at Marua Hills Lodge, Amara's world changed. Not because it was loud, not because someone found out, but because silence, when soaked in sin, becomes heavier than truth. She returned home quietly. She didn't cry. She didn't pray. She just sat on the floor beside her bed, holding the brass coin between her fingers. It was still hot. It had burned her during the act, so much that her chest felt sore. But she didn't stop. She hadn't even paused. And now the pain wasn't on her skin. It was inside her. Dio didn't message the next day. He didn't call either. But he didn't have to after all. What they had started could no longer be undone. Amara had opened the door, and whatever was waiting on the other side had entered. The days that followed were a blur. She went to church. She raised her hands during worship. She read Bible verses with the youth team. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Dio's smile. And every time she opened them, she saw Zainab's face. The guilt grew stronger, but the desire grew deeper. She tried to stay away. She blocked his number. She deleted every message. But temptation isn't tied to a phone. It lives in the mind. And in her mind, Dio was always there. 2 weeks later, Zainab called her again. She sounded excited. "Amara, I just wanted to say thank you. You've been such a blessing in my life." Amara froze. "Why are you thanking me?" "Because I trust you. I don't even trust some family members the way I trust you. Sometimes I feel like you're the only one who understands me." Amara's voice cracked. "Zainab, you don't need to say that." "I do," Zainab said softly. "And that's why I need to share something with you. Dio and we've decided to go ahead with adoption. We're starting the process next month." Tears welled up in Amara's eyes, not because she was happy for her friend, but because she knew, deep down, she was part of the reason that decision had become necessary. Zainab ended the call with prayers, and Amara ended it with shame. That evening, Dio sent another message. "Can I see you?" She replied, "No." "It's wrong." But the next day she was in his arms again. And this time it was worse, because this time there was no fear, no hesitation, only hunger, and the thrill of something forbidden that tasted too good to be rejected. They met again, and again, always in secret places, always behind locked doors, always with trembling hands and wild hearts. The affair grew like a weed in dry season, quick, stubborn, and impossible to hide, and Amara began to change. Her smiles faded, her eyes grew tired. She laughed less. She prayed even less. But one morning, while brushing her teeth, she vomited. Twice. At first, she thought it was stress. But when it happened again the next day, she knew. She sat on the edge of her bed, fingers pressed tightly together, the room spinning around her. No matter how much she prayed, no matter how hard she cried, one truth remained. She was pregnant. It took her 3 days to build the courage to buy a test kit. She hid it in a black nylon and waited until midnight. Alone in her bathroom, with trembling hands, she saw the 2 lines appear. Bold, clear, undeniable. Her knees buckled. She slid to the floor. The tears didn't come immediately. They arrived like a slow flood. Quiet, relentless, drowning. Amara thought about Zainab. She thought about the trust, the laughter, the sisterhood. She thought about her Bible, the prayers, the promises she once made to God. Then she thought about Dio, and the way he looked at her like she was the only thing keeping him alive. She made a decision. She would tell him, but not here, not in Olowo. She chose Osupa town, a small quiet place on the outskirts of the state where no one would recognize them. She booked the hotel, sent the location. At first, Dio hesitated. He asked if she was okay, asked if it was safe. She assured him it was just a weekend to rest, to think, to talk. He agreed. Amara arrived early. She decorated the small hotel room with soft light from the window. She wore a long dress, simple but beautiful. Her hand rested often on her stomach, even though nothing showed yet. She was carrying a life. And that life, she believed, would give her what she had never had, a place in Dio's world. This wasn't a game anymore. She wasn't just the other woman. She was the woman carrying his child. He arrived 2 hours late, but when he entered, he looked just like she remembered. Handsome, calm, and completely unaware of what was about to hit him. He kissed her cheek, held her hand. "Why are we here?" he asked. She smiled softly. "There's something you need to know." But before she could speak, the door burst open. A heavily pregnant woman stood there, her eyes wild, her breathing ragged. "Dio?" Amara stood in shock. Dio's face changed instantly. Panic, fear, shame. He rushed toward the woman. "Please, not here," he whispered, trying to lead her out. But the woman stepped further in, pointing at Amara. "Who is she? Who is this one?" Amara tried to speak, but her throat was dry. Then the woman turned to her, eyes full of confusion and rage. "How do you know my brother?" she shouted. Amara blinked. "Brother?" The woman nodded, tears falling. "Yes, Dio is my brother. Why are you here with him?" Amara froze. Zainab had told her. Dio had no family. He was an only child. So, who was this? The woman sobbed harder, dropping to her knees. "You don't understand," she whispered. "My brother died 8 years ago." Amara laughed. But it wasn't the laughter of joy. It was fear. Pure, cold, soul-gripping fear. Because something in her already knew. This was not an ordinary affair. This was something else entirely. Amara didn't remember leaving the hotel. She couldn't even recall how she got on the bus back to Olowo. All she remembered was the voice. That woman's voice. "My brother died 8 years ago." The words echoed like church bells in her skull. She had heard lies before. But this didn't sound like a lie. It sounded like a curse. Back in her small flat, Amara sat alone in the dark. She didn't eat. She didn't pray. She barely moved. The lights stayed off. Her curtains remained closed, and her phone silent. She tried to call Dio the next morning, but the number was switched off. She tried again, and again. Nothing. It was like he had vanished. The woman at the hotel had called him her brother, but Dio told Zainab he had no family, no siblings, no parents. He once said, "It's just me and my wife in this world." And Amara had believed it, because she wanted to. By the third day, she went to Dio and Zainab's house. She stood across the street, watching the gate. But no one came in. No one came out. She asked a neighbor. They said Zainab had traveled to her aunt's place for a few days. They hadn't seen Dio either. Amara nodded politely, but inside her fear was growing like wildfire. That night she dreamed again. She was walking through a dark forest, holding a child in her arms, a boy. His eyes were black, not brown, not dark, black, as if they held no soul. She heard chanting in the distance. A voice repeated over and over again. "You opened the door. You let him in. Raise what you conceived." Amara woke up gasping for breath, her nightgown soaked with sweat. She placed her hand on her belly. Still there, still growing. The child hadn't moved yet, but something inside her was alive, too alive. On the 7th day, Amara went to the hospital. She told the doctor she wasn't sure about her due date. He ran a scan. When he looked at the results, his face changed. "You're further along than you think," he said. She frowned. "But that's not possible." "Maybe you missed a cycle," the doctor suggested. Amara shook her head. "I know my body." The doctor hesitated. "You're measuring almost 6 months pregnant." 6 months? She had only been with Dio a little over 2. She left the hospital in silence. No cries, no screams, just silence. She went straight to Mama Iyabo's house. The prayer woman took one look at her and said, "You didn't run, and now it has entered you." Amara sat on the floor, her face pale. "I don't know what's inside me," she whispered. Mama Iyabo stood and began to pace. "There are things that come from the spirit world. They look human, they sound human, but they are not sent to love. They are sent to collect." Amara's eyes widened. "Collect what?" "Souls. Attention. Open doors," she replied. "You said the coin would burn when the sin was near," Amara said, trembling. "It did. It burned. But I didn't listen." The old woman nodded. "Then the door is open, and you must live with what has entered." Amara returned home that night and sat in front of her mirror for hours. She stared at her face, at her tired eyes, at the way her body had begun to change. Then, slowly, she removed the coin from her neck. The brass had turned darker, as if it had been roasted in fire. She placed it on the table and didn't touch it again. A few days later, Zainab returned to town. Amara knew she couldn't hide forever. She went to see her. Zainab looked tired, her eyes dull. She welcomed Amara inside and served her water. They sat quietly for a few minutes. Then Zainab spoke. "I haven't seen Dio," she said softly. "It's been a week. No calls, no messages, nothing." Amara stared at her glass. Zainab continued. "He told me he was going to Ibadan for a work meeting, but the office said he never showed up." Amara opened her mouth to respond, but her throat was too dry. Zainab's voice dropped. "I know you saw him. I know there's something you're not telling me." Amara's hands trembled. "I was with him," she confessed. "We met in Osupa. I told him I was pregnant." Zainab didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat back and closed her eyes. "So it's true," she said. "He betrayed me, and you helped him." Amara couldn't speak. "Leave," Zainab whispered. "Please, just go." Amara stood up slowly. She wanted to apologize, to explain, to say she didn't mean to fall in love with the one person she shouldn't. But no words could fix what had already broken. She walked out quietly, the sound of her footsteps louder than her guilt. That night, Amara lay on her bed and stared at the ceiling. The shadows in her room looked longer, thicker. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but the moment she did, she felt something move inside her. Not a normal kick, a shift, like a turning. She gasped and placed her hand on her belly. The movement stopped, but the fear remained. Because this wasn't just pregnancy. This wasn't just sin. This was something else, something she couldn't name. In the middle of the night, she heard a knock at her door. Slow, heavy. She froze. Another knock. Then silence. She tiptoed to the door and looked through the peephole. No one was there. She opened the door slowly and saw a small envelope on the floor. She picked it up, opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a folded note. 4 words were written in bold red ink. "You let him in." Amara collapsed to the floor, and for the first time since this all began, she screamed. Amara was no longer living. She was existing. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow made her heart race. Every night was a battlefield between fear and guilt. The note that arrived at her door had broken something inside her, not because of the words written on it, but because deep down she knew they were true. She had let him in. She stopped attending church, stopped answering calls. Even Zainab's angry voice notes went unanswered. Amara stayed locked in her small old unkept flat, curtains drawn, lights off, praying silently that the world would forget she existed. But the world wasn't the enemy anymore. What she had carried inside her, what was growing stronger every day, was the true danger. One Saturday morning, her cousin Isioma called her. Isioma, who lived in Okuta town, far enough from Olowo that no one would know her face or story. Isioma begged her to visit for the weekend. "Just come and rest," she said. "You sound tired." Amara agreed. She packed a small bag, just a few clothes and the worn Bible she no longer read, and she left Olowo without telling anyone. The bus ride was long and dusty. Amara sat by the window, staring blankly as trees and tiny villages blurred past her. When she finally arrived at Okuta town, Isioma hugged her tightly. "Ah, you're so skinny," Isioma said, concerned. "You need food and sleep." "No more fasting, I beg." Amara smiled weakly. If only her troubles could be solved with food. Isioma's house was small but warm, a two-room apartment with colorful curtains and the smell of freshly cooked egusi soup in the air. For the first time in weeks, Amara slept without hearing knocks, without seeing shadows move across her walls. She almost believed that maybe, just maybe, she could outrun the past. But peace has a short life when a storm is hunting you. On Sunday morning, Amara woke up early. The sun was not yet fully risen, and the room was still dim. She heard laughter, soft, childish giggles echoing from the living room. Confused, she tiptoed out of bed and crept toward the sound. There, sitting on the center rug, was a little boy. He wore nothing but a small white cloth tied around his waist. His back was to her. He played with tiny stones, arranging them in a circle. Amara's mouth went dry. She didn't move. She couldn't. Slowly the boy turned his head. Halfway. Not fully. Just enough for her to see that his eyes were pitch black. Black like endless wells. Black like places prayers cannot reach. She stumbled back, bumping into a stool. The sound shattered the moment. The boy vanished. The stones lay scattered on the rug. Isioma rushed into the room, alarmed by the noise. "Amara, what happened?" Amara's lips trembled. I saw a child," she whispered. Isioma frowned. "Child? There's no child here, only me and you." Amara looked at the empty rug, and fear squeezed her heart like a fist. Later that evening, Isioma made pepper soup. Amara could barely eat. Everything smelled wrong, tasted wrong. The walls felt closer, the air thicker. She excused herself and went to lie down. But the moment she closed her eyes, she heard it again. Laughter. Software mocking. Inside her head. Amara sat up sharply. She clutched her stomach. The baby was kicking violently, harder than before. It didn't feel normal. It didn't feel like life. It felt like a battle raging inside her womb. The next morning, Amara told Isioma she had to return to Olowo. "No, stay," Isioma pleaded. "You're not strong yet." Amara shook her head firmly. There was a pull dragging her back, a sense that something worse would happen if she stayed. She returned to Olowo that afternoon. The journey felt longer this time. Every bump on the road sent a sharp pain through her body. When she arrived at her flat, she noticed the envelope still lying on the floor inside. She hadn't picked it up. She hadn't touched it. But it was there, waiting. She picked it up now, and inside, tucked behind the old note, was a second slip of paper. It read, "Prepare. It is almost time." That night, Amara lit a candle and sat by the window. The baby kicked again and again, almost violently. She clutched her belly and rocked back and forth, whispering prayers she hadn't said in months. Tears ran freely down her face. "God, please have mercy. Please. If you still see me, Elroy, please." But the candle flickered, and then the flame went out, plunging her room into cold, thick darkness. Amara lay down slowly. She didn't bother locking the doors. What use was a lock against what was already inside? As she drifted into a broken sleep, she heard footsteps, software careful, inside her room. She dared not open her eyes, because she already knew. The weekend that was supposed to heal her had broken her beyond repair. From that night forward, Amara no longer felt alone. Even in silence, something moved around her. In her kitchen, behind her bathroom curtain, in the mirror when she brushed her teeth. Sometimes it was a shadow, sometimes it was a breath on her neck, but most times it was just a feeling, cold, watching, patient. She tried to sleep, tried to pray, tried to sing old worship songs she remembered from her childhood. But the air in her room was no longer air. It was something else, heavy, dark, and filled with memory. The baby no longer kicked like other babies. It turned, twisted, shifted, like it was searching for something inside her. And Amara, more than anything, began to fear her own womb. One afternoon, while washing her bedsheet in the backyard, a woman passing by stopped and stared at her stomach. Amara smiled politely. The woman didn't smile back. She simply said, "That child is not yours," and walked away. Amara dropped the soapy cloth in the basin. Her breath caught in her throat. She went to see Mama Iyabo again that evening. The old woman didn't even ask why she came. She simply opened the door, stepped aside, and pointed to the mat. Amara sat, her hands shaking. After a long silence, Mama Iyabo spoke. "You're no longer alone." Amara nodded. The woman continued. "He didn't just use your body. He used your spirit. He entered through your weakness. And now, the child is his seed." Amara broke down. Tears spilled like rain from a broken cloud. "I didn't know," she whispered. Mama Ayabo knelt beside her. "There is a way to fight this," she said, "but it will come with pain." Amara wiped her eyes. "Anything, just tell me." The old woman brought out a small wooden box. Inside was a bottle of thick red oil, a white cloth, and a single black stone. She handed Amara the stone. "Put this under your pillow. If he comes again and you see him in your dream, call his name 3 times. If he answers, then you are no longer dealing with a man. You are dealing with a spirit." That night, Amara obeyed. She placed the stone beneath her pillow and lay still. The house was quiet, too quiet. Even the night insects refused to make noise. Then, at 2:13 a.m., she saw him, Dio, standing in the corner of her room, shirtless, his skin glowing faintly in the dark. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. He just stood there. Amara sat up slowly. Her hands trembled as she whispered, "Dio." No response. "Dio," she called again, voice cracking. Still nothing. Then, the 3rd time, she whispered it like a secret. "Dio." This time he turned, but when he faced her, his eyes were black, empty, like the eyes of the boy she had seen in Okuta. He smiled slowly, and the moment she screamed, he disappeared. The next morning, Amara went back to Mama Iyabo, holding the black stone like it was her last breath. The old woman sighed deeply. "It has begun," she said. "He is no longer hiding." Amara collapsed at her feet. "What do I do? What do I do?" Mama Uyabo looked at her belly. "You must carry this child," she said. "But after birth, you must never speak his name. Never look him in the eyes, never love him like a mother." Amara's chest tightened. "That's my child," she said. "No," the woman replied. "It's your consequence." Weeks passed. Amara stayed indoors. Her stomach grew faster than expected. By the 7th month, it looked like 9. Neighbors whispered. Children pointed. Old women shook their heads when she passed, but no one said a word to her face. They didn't need to. Amara could hear their thoughts. One night, while standing at her window, she heard her name, clear, soft, close. She turned. Dio was in her mirror, not behind her, in her mirror. His reflection stared at her, smiling calmly. She gasped and stepped back, but the image remained. "You gave me life again," the reflection whispered. Amara ran from the room, holding her stomach like it was about to fall out. She ran to the church, but the doors were locked. She knelt outside under the stars and cried, "God, where are you?" But the sky was silent. The next morning, Amara went for another scan. The nurse frowned. "You're almost at full term," she said. "But I'm not due yet," Amara argued. The nurse looked again. "The baby is fully developed, healthy, ready." Amara left the hospital shaking. Something was rushing this child into the world. Something was pushing him out faster than time allowed. That evening, Amara received one final message. No number, just words. "Prepare. I am coming." She stood by her window for hours, the coin from Mama Iyabo clutched in her hand. The room was cold, though all the windows were shut. Then, without warning, her water broke. A rush of warmth down her legs, pain in her back, pressure in her belly. She screamed for help, but no one came. She was alone, except with her feelings. She wasn't. Something was already in the room with her. Something was watching, waiting, smiling. Amara fell to her knees. The contractions began, hard, fast, unnatural, and in that moment, as the candle beside her flickered and died, she knew. The echoes of the dead had found her, and they would not leave without their prize. Amara had always thought childbirth would be a battle of pain and joy, but this was different. This was a battle between the living and the dead. The contractions came harder and fast, tearing through her body like storms through fragile walls. There was no midwife, no nurse, no prayer team, only Amara, her screams and the shadows that thickened around her room. She crawled to the center of the room, clutching her swollen stomach, tears blinding her vision. The candle had gone out long ago. Only the faint moonlight from the window remained, casting long, trembling shadows across the walls. She pushed. The pain was unbearable. Like her bones were breaking one by one. She pushed again and again, until, with one final curdling scream, the room fell silent. Completely silent. No crying, no wailing, no soft whimper of a newborn life. Only silence. Amara collapsed backward onto the floor, chest heaving, eyes wide in terror. She forced herself to sit up, heart pounding against her ribs. And then she saw him. A baby lay on the floor. Perfect, silent, watching, not blinking. His skin was pale, too pale, his eyes wide, too wide. And deep within those eyes, Amara didn't see innocence. She saw something ancient, something patient, something that had waited for years to find a way back into the world. She reached out with trembling hands, desperate to pick him up, desperate to feel some spark of motherly love. But the moment her fingers brushed his skin, her body convulsed. A burning sensation ran up her arms. Her vision blurred. She fell backward, gasping for air. From the corner of her room, a figure stepped out of the darkness. It was Dio, or what was left of him. His face was the same, his body was the same, but his eyes, those terrible, empty eyes, held no soul. He smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "You kept your promise," he whispered. Amara tried to crawl away, but her body refused to obey. She was frozen, trapped between the world of the living and the world of the lost. Dio knelt beside the child. He touched the baby's forehead gently, and the baby blinked. Once, slowly, then smiled. A smile so cold it sucked the air from the room. "You carried him," Dio said, his voice soft like a lullaby. "Now you must raise him." Tears streamed down Amara's face. "No, please," she whispered. "Please take him away. I can't." But Dio only shook his head. You opened the door. You chose this. He stood up slowly, and as he faded back into the shadows, his voice echoed one final time. He is yours now. The baby, still silent, crawled toward Amara. His small fingers dug into the floor with unnatural strength. He climbed onto her lap, staring into her soul. Amara turned her head away. She remembered Mama Iyabo's warning. Do not look into his eyes. Do not love him like a mother. But it was too late, because in that moment, in that single terrible moment, Amara made the mistake every mother would make. She looked at him, and she saw herself, her own brokenness, her own hunger for love, her own sins reflected back at her. The bond snapped into place instantly, invisible but unbreakable. The child giggled, not a baby's laugh, but a sound too old, too heavy, too knowing. He nestled against her chest, and Amara, with her last bit of strength, wrapped her arms around him. By morning, the people of Olovo found her, sitting on the floor of her room, rocking a silent child in her arms. Her eyes were blank. Her lips were moving, but no words came out, only soft humming, a lullaby. One no one recognized. They said she had lost her mind. Some said she was cursed. Some said she had given birth to a demon. But the truth was far worse. Amara hadn't just given birth to a child. She had given birth to a door that once opened could never be shut again. Even now in Olowo village, people say you can sometimes hear her at night, humming softly, rocking her child. And if you listen closely, very closely, you will hear another voice humming with her. A voice that doesn't belong to the living. A voice from beyond the grave. The voice of the man she should never have loved. The voice of the sin she could have overcome. Thank you for watching. Please support me by liking and subscribing to my channel. See you in the next one.